Buonasera, good evening. I'm Raphaële Mouren. I am the head of research collections here at the British School at Rome. Poi sono gli organizzatori che... So this year we were trying to go from south to north, but we had to change a bit the program, so we are going back south today. And we are very happy to welcome Vivien Prigent. Vivien was a research fellow at the École française de Rome, as I was 10 years before. And he's a research professor, directeur de recherche at the Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique in France. He was head of the classic and medieval studies at the Maison Française d'Oxford, and now he's director of medieval studies at the École française de Rome. He's a director and the person making happening the mélange de l'École française de Rome Moyen Âge, and he's a co-editor of the monographie du Centre de recherche d'histoire et civilisation de Byzance du Collège de France, and as well as travaux et mémoires. Vivien is a specialist of administrative, fiscal, and monetary history, a field he tackles mainly through sigillography and numismatic sources. His main field of expertise is the Byzantine provinces of the central Mediterranean, Sicily, Italy, and Africa, to which he has dedicated some 90 publications, including the 4 volumes of the project L'héritage byzantin en Italie, in collaboration with Jean-Marie Martin. We already said the word about Jean-Marie Martin a few sessions ago, and Annick Peter-Custeau. He is currently completing the publication of the catalogue of Byzantine seals in the museums of Reggio Calabria, Syracuse, and Palermo. And today he will speak about Byzantine Sicily, the empire's bulwark in the West. And it will be in English. First time, I think. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Raphaële. Thank you for the invitation. I thought speaking in English was mandatory, so I brought my text in English, but you will see my oratory is not very Byzantine, but okay. So let's go. So it is customary to stress the difficulties Byzantium encountered when trying to assert its control over faraway outlying provinces, especially the western ones. Clearly, sheer distances and communication problems made the endeavor quite hazardous, as pointed out to the Emperor Justinian by his main minister on the eve of the imperial attack against Africa in 530. How are we going to administer this province, considering that it takes more than a year to send a message there and receive back the answer? Nonetheless, the empire kept control of the western provinces of Africa, Sicily, and Italy up to the momentous political, economic, and religious crisis of the 690s, 750s. Amongst all the western provinces, Sicily was the only one to pass the gauntlet. Indeed, the island, conquered in 535, remained part of the empire integrally up to 820s, and partly to the last quarter of the 10th century, since the Muslim conquest took nearly 150 years to complete. Calabria, a part of the former Byzantine province of Sicily, remained even longer inside the empire, passing under Norman rule only during the second half of the 11th century. So I will endeavor today to explain this unique historical evolution, keeping more specifically to administrative problems and dynamics. 4 main reasons can be ascertained. First, the island never belonged to the normal provincial administrative system, topped by the Praetorian prefect, and later in Italy, the exarch. Second, at the end of the 7th century, the military system, first known as the strategia and later the FIMA, was introduced in the island, albeit with very important specificities. Third, the island always benefited from a very strong monetary production. Fourth, the Sicilian population, and specifically its elite, always benefited from a privileged access to the emperor. These four characteristics shielded the island from the evolution which undermined Byzantine authority elsewhere in the western provinces. I won't be able to delve in detail into these 4 points. What I will do is I will offer a series of cameos illustrating various facets of Sicilian history under 2 main chronological headings, before and after the administrative watershed represented by the creation of the Strategia Ophima Sicilias around 692. One important aspect I won't tackle is the evolution of the network of bishoprics, even if obviously the church played a very important role in the control of the island by Byzantium. So I will stick today to lay administration, and I will make use mainly of seals and coins, my twin field of expertise, and I hope I will convince you of the importance of this often neglected evidence. In 537, Emperor Justinian enacted a novel, that is a law, regulating the administration of the newly conquered island of Sicily. Its provisions, apart from very small modifications, were enforced until the end of the 7th century and the creation of the Fima of Sicily. The rationale behind all the regulations was to tie as strongly as possible the island to the central institutions of the empire, namely the Constantinopolitan offices and the emperor himself. The text is very difficult to analyze because it is very short. So interpreting it properly demands to take into account the whole prefectural system, even if Sicily wasn't part of this system. Indeed, the whole point of the law is to answer this problem. If the imperial government wants to attach a province directly to the central administrative offices and not to the authority of the provincial prefects, what central offices will take care of the various aspects, the various tasks usually assumed by the prefect. The regulations addressed 4 primary administrative problems: military power, justice, taxation, and urban institutions. As far as military matters are concerned, the novel mentions indirectly a dux by addressing the problem of his judiciary authority. As such, most historians accepted the existence of a dux Siciliae, even if not a single source offers an example of such an officer. The existence of this officer has even been used to posit the existence of 2 different capitals in Sicily, a military capital in Syracuse and a civil capital in Catania, both benefiting from their own mint. Actually, no source mentions such a dux, even if Sicily is certainly the best documented province at the end of the 6th century, Egypt excepted, obviously. Indeed, such a dux of Sicily very probably never existed, quite simply because it was useless. The emperor chose to place the island under a governor whose title was praetor, Latin word. Now, other laws, contemporary laws of Justinian, reforming Byzantine Asia Minor, give a clear definition of this office. I quote here novel 24, reforming Pisidia. We believe that the Romans of old would never have been able to build such a state if they had not presented themselves, when they sent magistrates in the provinces, as perfectly respectable and had not given to these magistrates both the civil and military power. These magistrates, they gave the name of praetor. Consequently, we thought preferable to unify military and civil command and to name praetor the magistrate vested with this authority. And this very novel law continues by mentioning explicitly Sicily as an example of this old Roman tradition. And another law of the same time says, and now present-day offices, both civil and military, have to be united in a single office distinguished by the title of praetor. So when taking into consideration the whole legislation of Justinian, it is obvious that the emperor intended to put the meager forces garrisoned in Sicily under the authority of the mainly civil governor, the praetor. There was no need for a dux. So how must we understand the reference to a dux judiciary activity in Sicily? I think that this mention should be read as a provision addressing the problems of military troops using Sicily as a temporary landing before joining either the African or the Italian theaters of war. The island was indeed the main military interchange of the Western Mediterranean, and billeting troops always led to trouble with the local civilians. The main point remains: we have no trace of this duke, and we should not admit a dual power with two capitals and two means, civil and military. This will be useful for us later on, that's why I'm insisting on it. So the praetor was in charge of the civilian military, a token force at best. His primary function remained civil, but usually a civilian governor operated under the authority of the praetorian prefect. Placing Sicily under the jurisdiction of the praetorian prefect of Italy demanded to modify the powers of the provincial governors on three key points. First, in judiciary matters, appeals to the praetor's decisions were to be sent to the office of the quaestor of the Sacred Palace in Constantinople. So keep this in mind, because this decision had an administrative legacy that we will be able to trace down to the 9th century, which amply demonstrates its importance. The quaestor was also in charge for confirming the nomination made by the praetor to various offices in the Sicilian cities. This regulation established a direct connection between the island and this exalted official, the quaestor, who had daily contacts with the emperor himself, and as such, put the Sicilian populations in a very privileged position. The fact that the urban magistrates, officers, were confirmed directly by Constantinople might have played a role in the survival of some of these local officers up to the 8th century, as exemplified by this seal of a pater poleos, that is the father of the city. It's a civic office created in the 4th, 5th century, and in Sicily, it survived up to the beginning of the 8th century, at least. It's a unicum. The trickiest field was financial administration, since fiscal matters were usually tightly controlled by the praetorian prefect. Justinian's system for Sicily can be summarized as follows. A new office, the comes patrimonii per Italiam, was responsible for levying the taxes. It then transferred the taxes to various administrations in charge of expenses. Part of the annona, that is the tax in kind for the army, was, however, entrusted to the praetor, as the law says that he was responsible for military expenses. He was also responsible for all procedures of compulsory purchases to feed the soldiers, as these were usually managed by the praetorian prefect, but there is no certainty, so I won't insist on this. So to conclude on this point, the very purpose of the novel of 537 was to establish a new governor combining military and civil authority, but mainly civil, and to distribute the financial and judiciary responsibilities of the praetorian prefect between this local praetor and two central offices in Constantinople, the quaestor of the Sacred Palace and the comes patrimonii per Italiam. Up to the creation of the military thema at the end of the 7th century, the most important evolution in the administration of Byzantine Sicily was the growing importance of another central financial office, the Domus Divina. That is the department responsible for the private estates of emperor and empresses. We lose track at an early date of the comes patrimonii per Italiam, and the officers of the Domus Divina probably took over these prerogatives. Decisive testimonies on this process comes from a letter, various letters, of Pope Gregory the Great, so 591-604, letters describing to the Empress the abuses committed in Sicily by a cartularius marinarum to be identified as an officer of Domus Marinae, the House of Marina, one of the subsections of the Domus Divina. Two seals of a cartularius to Icu tis Marinis, found in Sicily, in Sardinia, sorry, and Africa, as well as an hexagon, that is an official weight to weight coins, mentioning another officer of this institution, that has been found in Mazara, documents and confirms the activity of the Domus Marinae in these provinces. The key point is that Gregorius' letters prove that the Comes Patrimoni per Italiam was no longer the sole responsible for the management of imperial properties in the island. The agents of the Domus Divina, that is, eunuchs from the imperial bedchamber service, the cubiculum, were coming to the fore. This is very important because it allows us to understand the next evolution. For the 7th century, we have indeed very, very few sources shedding light on the administration of the island. The only really useful are the lead seals. Now, the only civil administrators seemingly active in Sicily are precisely eunuchs from the cubiculum with financial responsibilities. And you are here Cartularius and the Sacellarius. Especially important is here the seal of the Sacellarius, that is the bursa, literally it means the bursa, the chief financial officer of the cubiculum, who during the 7th century extended his control over the whole financial administration of the empire. So all these points in the same direction. The imperial bedchamber took control over Sicily, strengthening once more the ties to the emperor, and they are the eunuchs of the emperor. As local financial administrator, had privileged access to the sovereign. This happened on the background of the withering of the praetor's authority after 569. On this year, 569, Emperor Justin II enacted a law which transformed completely the office of governor everywhere in the empire. Henceforth, the governors were elected by the local elites. So they stopped being agents of the emperor, and they were more akin to a representative of the local society, and accordingly, they lost power. And it's in this context that the eunuchs of the bedchamber took the fore. Nonetheless, the praetor survived, probably evolving toward the civic office with special responsibilities over the city of Catania when the capital was moved to Syracuse, as demonstrated by this new piece of evidence very recently identified. So it's the last of the praetor, which was called eparch at the time. The emperor's decision, and there is also a unicum, the portrait of Saint Agatha is a unicum. So the emperor's decision to establish a tight control over the island stemmed from the importance of the agricultural resources of the island. And from the 7th century, we can observe the enactment of various policies aiming at reinforcing the integration of the island to the Eastern Mediterranean economy. The main instrument of this economic policy was the coinage, and specifically the metrology of the coinage. So metrology, it's the norms regulating the physical characteristics of the coins. So to keep things simple, there are two main parameters to take into account: the weight of the coin and the purity of the alloy used to produce the coins, gold, bronze, silver. When these norms, these characteristics are identical between two regions, trade is easy as the coins have the same value. It's the euro, basically. Now, as the emperor had full authority to modify these norms, he was able to facilitate the transactions between two areas by harmonizing at best the characteristics of the coinage. As such, the study of metrology is a very powerful instrument for us. If we study the origins of coins found in a province, in a given province, we can learn a lot about the trade between this province and the neighboring ones. But thanks to metrology, we can try to understand what kind of trade network the authorities wanted to promote, which is quite different and an ideal complement to the first approach. In the field of Sicilian monetary economy, the first lesson is that the island always enjoyed a very plentiful supply of bronze coinage. That is the coinage more economically significant. It is enough here to compare the situation between two outlying provinces. You see the drop, and after the Constant II is completely flat in Cappadocia. When here it's very high, this is only a very short range, so it's a very short period. So you see, it's always huge production of copper coin. If we take a look at the origin of the coinage, it is obvious that the island had a very open economy at the end of the 6th century. Under Justin II, so the upper one, the diversity of coinage reached its peak, partly because under his reign, all coins from the various means were produced to the same metrological norm. On the contrary, under the reign of Maurice, so our figure, Oriental coins are 6 times more numerous than Western ones. Especially Italian coins became very rare. Now, at the very beginning of Maurice's reign, the metrology of the various coinage of the empire diverged for reasons pertaining to the diverging values of precious metals. It is too complex for tonight. And the imperial authorities made the deliberate decision to keep the Sicilian coinage in line with the Oriental coinage, not the Italian coinage. So at this point, monetary exchange was easier between Syracuse and Constantinople than between Syracuse and Ravenna or Syracuse and Rome, for example. Later on, around 620, Sicily was literally flooded with old coins from the 6th century. You see, this is a coin with the name of Emperor Anastasius. So flooded with old coin from the 6th century bearing a countermark with the head of Heraclius. These old coins came from the east, most certainly from Constantinople. Now, at the same time, the metrology of the coins produced in Sicily, so this is a decanumion from Sicily, was changed in order to adapt to the metrology of these old coins, thus enabling their common circulation. During the 630s, the imperial government went even further. The mint of Sicily was closed, and a coinage specifically produced for Sicily was struck in Constantinople and then sent to the island by ship. Consequently, under Heraclius, 88% of the coins put in circulation in Sicily came from Constantinople, an extremely powerful instrument of control of the local economy. And this happened at the very same time when the lead seals begin to reveal the growing importance of this, of the cubiculum in Sicily. And I personally think that the countermark, that the mint mark, SCL, was initially a kind of pun standing both for Sicily and Sakeli. It's the same letters. So why this policy? The chronology gives us the answer. The influx of the countermarked coins began in 619 and lasted 10 years, until 629. That is exactly the duration of the occupation of Egypt by the Persians. For this reason, I propose that these old coins were used to buy grain to compensate for the loss of Egypt's bountiful harvests. And indeed, the island's importance for the imperial government derived first of all during the 7th century from its capacity to offer alternative source of grain to feed Constantinople. Initially, Sicily shared this burden with Africa, but when the Muslims conquered this last province, controlling Sicily became paramount. Ultimately, this ever-growing importance of the Sicilian grain resulted in the creation of a new specific office, the embolator. So embolator is an apax, it's mentioned only on these seals, but it derives from emboli, a fiscal term referring to the taxes in kind, especially grain, sent from Egypt to Constantinople. And now it's applied to Sicily. Up until recently, the office of embolator was known only from these seals, and so the provincial, and they were found in Sicily and in Constantinople. So the nature of the office, provincial or central, was doubtful, but recently a new seal has appeared, and it mentioned embolator Sicilias, so now there is no doubt. Let's take two last examples of the importance of metrology to understand the policies enacted by the Byzantine government to control Sicily and harness its resources. Under Emperor Constantine IV, Constantinople struck very curious coins with two marks of value. This coin, for example, is a 20 numi, kappa, but it's also a 40 numi coin. And this one is a 10 numi coin, but it's also a 20 numi coin. So it's like if you got a coin of 2 euros, but it's also written 4 euros, smaller mark of value. So it's very strange. This phenomenon has been explained by the fact that the coin of Constantine IV would have been 2 times more valuable than those of his father, Constans II. Hence the necessity to specify both the values. But actually the values of Constantine IV's follies was not at all twice the value of Constans II follies. So this hypothesis must be discarded. Under Constantine IV, the only mint which produced a follis, so a 40 numi coin, whose value was half the value of the Constantinopolitan follis was Catania in Sicily. So it seems that this double mark of value refers to the exchange rate between the central coinage and the coin struck in the only other mint which produced important quantities of copper at the time, that is Sicily. As such, it seems to be yet another indicator of a deliberate policy to strengthen the links, economic links, between the island and the central provinces of the empire. Last example, probably even more important because it concerned the gold coinage, that is the main financial instrument of the imperial government. At the end of the 7th century, Emperor Justinian II, the one who lost his nose, decided to lower the weight of the Sicilian gold coin, the solidus, an unprecedented decision since the coin had remained unchanged since its creation by Constantine I in the 4th century. From Justinian II onwards, the Sicilian solidus weighted 22 carats instead of 24. So what was the rationale for this, once more, very strange decision? To understand it, we must remember that Sicily was simultaneously part of 2 different but partly overlapping economic spaces. The first covered the Eastern Mediterranean, the second, Italy. Now in Italy, the quality of the gold alloy used to produce coins had begun to deteriorate, even if the official weight was still the same, 24 carats. So this created a problem for Sicily, because if both the Sicilian solidus and the Italian solidus had officially the same value, the Sicilian coin contained 2 carats more gold, so the exchange was unfair. The simplest solution would have been to use also in Sicily an alloy of lesser purity, but in this case, the exchanges and especially the payment of taxes would have been difficult with the Oriental provinces. Lowering the weight gave the perfect solution. You could trade without problem with Italy, that's what you see here, because 22 carats of pure gold contain the same quality of fine gold than 24 carats of debased alloy. Sorry, it's a little bit technical. But at the same time, you could send the taxes toward Constantinople, because since the alloy was pure, it was very easy to melt the coins and struck new ones without expenditure, because the cost is mainly from the refining of the gold. You just melt it and struck anew. So you see, it works in both directions. The same kind of logic explains the 8th century monetary reforms of Emperor Leo III, the emperor striving to maintain an easy exchange rate between the central and insular monetary system. Around 700, the Sicilian mint struck astounding quantities of gold coins, around 2/3 of the Constantinopolitan production. So it's more than all the gold produced at the same time everywhere in the West simultaneously. And this resulted in the debasement a slight debasement of the Sicilian coinage, but a massive debasement of the Italian coinage, because certainly most of the gold was sent to Sicily in order to feed this huge production. So a debasement. But while on the mainland, these debasements spiraled out of control, in Sicily, Emperor Leo III stabilized the gold currency on new metrological ground. No, it weighted 3.8 grams and 83% fine gold, but you can forget it. You already forgot it, I forgot. So why this choice? Well, it allowed for a clear exchange rate with the metropolitan coinage struck in Syracuse, in Constantinople. Considering this characteristic, the weight and the alloy, with one solidus, a full gold coin, and one tremisis, a third of gold coin, struck in Syracuse, you had the exact quantity of fine gold than with one Constantinopolitan solidus. And while in Constantinople, they stopped producing the tremises, it continued in Sicily because it was useful for this exchange rate. Furthermore, this monetary reform explained a very famous passage by the chronicler Theophanes. And Theophanes said that Emperor Leo III increased Sicilian taxes by 1/3. Actually, I think that there was no increase at all, but when the administration recalculated the taxes in the new currency, someone who formerly had to pay one solidus now paid one solidus and a tremises. But the quantity of gold he paid was exactly the same. It's on the paper that the taxes were raised by 1/3. And this was used as a polemical attack against this iconoclast emperor. But in fact, there was no raise. It's just, when my salary was reformulated in euros, it was not divided by 6.5. Luckily for me, it was just a new currency. But I could have protested against the government. Oh, you took away most of my stipends, 84% of my stipend. So all this could be a simple detail. But this new Sicilian coin has to be identified with the famous mancus mentioned in the Italian charters. And this coin, the mancus, Michael McCormick has identified as the Muslim dinar and presented in his famous book, The Origin of the European Economy, as the main instrument of Italy's precocious economical revival. So the importance of assessing properly Leo III's reform can be stressed enough, since it has far-reaching consequences for our understanding of the dynamics of Carolingian economy and the takeoff of European economy. The scope of all these monetary policies were always to anchor the island to Constantinople and to harness its riches, to fund the state. As I said previously, the administrative system put in place in 537 survived until the last years of the 7th century. Faced with the rising tide of the Muslim invasions in North Africa, Sicily became a military province under the authority of a strategos, what Byzantinists called a FIMA, even if actually nobody is able to tell exactly what a FIMA is before the 9th century, but at the time the term strategia should be preferred. Now I would like to draw your attention on the specificity of the recruitment of the strategi, the new governor, the military governor of Sicily. Most of them are known both from literary sources and seals. I'll give you here a sample. The common point is that these 6 strategy were eunuchs. As a matter of fact, only one strategos of Sicily before the 9th century was certainly not a eunuch. Now, this recruitment was very specific to Sicily. You don't find at this time, obviously there are a few exceptions, eunuchs acting as strategos elsewhere. Second feature, around 90% of the known strategi of Sicily held the rank of patricios, the highest dignity at the time, and no other provinces had such an impressive record. So it is clear that Sicily enjoyed governors selected amongst the highest eunuch dignitaries, a group specially close to the emperor. But actually, the administrative reform creating the strategia did not change the recruitment of the really important administrators in the island. During the 7th century, as we have seen, we had eunuchs from the cubiculum. Now, with the military province, we have strategy, but the strategy are chosen among the eunuchs of the cubiculum. So even them, they were able to say, tutto cambia, affinché nulla cambi. We will reach the same conclusion if we have a look at the civil administration. It also offers intriguing peculiarities. From the 9th century onwards, the financial administration of a regular Byzantine FIMA, any one of them, was controlled by an officer called the protonotarios, so from the beginning of the 9th century. But in Sicily, seals document the existence of the protonotarion since the beginning of the 8th century, 1 full century earlier. This discrepancy can be readily explained. The protonotarios represented locally the sacellarios, that is the chief controller of the imperial finance, the head of the cubiculum. Now, as we have seen with the recruitment of the strategos, the FEMA of Sicily remained firmly under the control of the eunuchs of the imperial bedchamber, and the sacellarios was the most important member of the cubiculum. So you see, it's not surprising to see his representative, the protonotarios, active in Sicily much earlier than anywhere else in the empire. The second office I would like to present quickly is the epiton deiseon. This official, so it's the guy in charge of petitions. This official responsible to receive the petitions addressed to the emperor and to draft official answer. Now, Sicily, alone amongst all the imperial provinces, had the privilege to have a resident epiton deiseon, able to pass along Sicilian petitions to the emperor. If we take into account the fact that the epiton deiseon stemmed from the office of the questor sacri palatii, it is clear that this is in fact the last avatar of the judicial privilege given to Sicily in 537 by Justinian, the privilege I mentioned at the beginning of my talk. Beyond that, many things remain unchanged, and the creation of the military province was far from a sweeping reform. You can see here the diversity of the local situations, which mirror at least 4 historical stages. The Paterpoleos in Syracuse is a legacy of the late antiquity, 4th-5th century. The dux was created in the 7th century by Constans II. The archon was the thematic creation of the 8th century. The eparchos was an avatar of the praetor of Justinian. So you see, you have all the various strata of administration piling over each other and not a real reform. So behind the facade of the very known and hieratic administration of Byzantium, it was, in fact, actually a hotspot of everything they could use. But the most important feature of the system was that the Sicilian population not only had the governor particularly close to the emperor and so are able to support their claims with efficiency, but they enjoyed a special officer whose job was precisely to listen to their petitions, their claims, and transfer them to the emperor. It was extremely privileged position. I will conclude on this point with a small case study introducing us to a problem of social history, the problem of honorary titles bestowed by the emperor to the Sicilian local elite. I will here apply what I call the gentleman and officer's test. It's an homage to Tom Brown. One of the topoi of Italian historiography, old one, is that Constantinople exploited Sicily for a group of nearly parasitic officers, colonial model. So to test this hypothesis, I decided to compare the social status of both administrators and local aristocrats. This can be done because seals mention both honorific titles and actual office. As such, we can sort the simple aristocrats from the actual officers. And by giving numeric value to each title, you can calculate the overall social status of various groups of people. And here the results are quite clear. As you can see, the average rank value of the members of the local elite is on the par with the ranks enjoyed by the officers. There was no way for officials to freely oppress an humble local population. The local elite had ready access to the emperors, and the privileged positions is directly mirrored in the title they receive. All these titles are completely absent elsewhere in Italy. Once we acknowledge this, it is also necessary, I think, to admit that this local elite, in fact, also provided most of the administrative staff, and that most of the local administrators are indeed of local origin. So let's return to our eunuch strategy. They were now officially the governors of the island, and Sicily was one of the very first femata, military province. But it offers yet another specificity. The very first femata were created in Asia Minor from the last remnants of the Roman armies defeated in Syria, Armenia, and the Balkans. In Sicily, this kind of policy wasn't possible because there were no army previously. So what kind of troops were available in the island to create the new army? As we have seen, the Praetor of Sicily officially commanded the local forces, but they were at best a skeleton crew. Sicily provided recruits for the imperial army, as demonstrated by the letters of Pope Gregory the Great, describing the activity of scrivones, scoring the island for young men, but these were intended to serve in the local force elsewhere. Insularity was the real defense of the island. So in this context, the imperial government had to commit important military forces to its defense. Once more, the only information we have regarding the nature come from sigillographic evidences. They hint toward garrisoning in the island of elite troops from the main imperial army, the Obsequion. So these are the earliest attestation of the imperial field army, and they are both found in Sicily. The policy probably began with the arrival of Emperor Constans II in Sicily, where he lived 6 years. As we know, Constans II was murdered in Syracuse, and the imperial power was seized after his demise by an Armenian general called Medzesios, who headed the Obsequion. And recently, an exceptional document has come to light. As I was editing the seal of the Museum of Carthage, here you have the seal of the imperial seal of the rebel Medzesios. So it's a splendid piece of evidence. But the important point is that initially Sicily was protected by units of the imperial field army, and the reason, so the central forces, and the reason Sicily was able to support such an efficient fighting force was undoubtedly linked to the activity of the local mint, whose increased output we have already seen. Unfortunately, we can be sure that soldiers from the Obsequion were incorporated in the Sicilian army on the long run, but certainly other elite troops were, as demonstrated by further sigillographic material. The museum collections of Sicily possess a small series of puzzling seals. They witness the presence in the island of military units normally garrisoned in Constantinople, elite Constantinople units, the tagmata. So they could testify towards the perpetuation of the policy implemented by Constans II, that is the garrisoning of the island by regiments picked from the central forces. And this policy would have been perfectly coherent with the recruitment of eunuchs from the imperial cubiculum as strategy. Ultimately, the unique resources of the island enabled the emperors to create in Sicily a unique military system benefiting or based on at least 6 elite units permanently kept under arms, while elsewhere in the empire, most soldiers were part-time, answering only seasonal summons. This is documented by the appearance of a new category of seals mentioning officers titled topoterete, handling with specific city, and until now 6 different commands, namely Tropea, Enna, Syracuse, Catania, Ragusa, and Cefalu, are known. These cities are always mighty fortresses, and 2 of them were clearly at the center of former pontifical estates. A third one occupied a city whose local name, Irogi, literally means the granaries. So here they are controlling the agricultural production and protecting it. As the title of Topoteretis belongs to the military hierarchy of the central elite forces in Constantinople, these city Topotereti were probably commanders in charge of the local elite units modeled on the central field army. So it's an extremely powerful army, and it's an army conceived to attack beyond the border of Sicily. The chronology of the appearance of these seals and the location of the units suggest a connection with the decision of Constantine V to seize the extensive estates the Pope possessed in Sicily and Calabria. This last remarks leads me to broach the last topic of my talk, the rivalry between popes and emperor over Sicily's resources and its unforeseen consequences for the history of Europe. During the 6th and 7th centuries, the Pope built an extremely effective system of control over Sicily based on the synergy between ecclesiastical and socio-economic power. First, the Pope controlled the episcopal election from above and from below. From below, because the Pope had extensive land holdings everywhere in Sicily. So the Pope were possessor in every city in Sicily. And as such, they were able to participate in the selection of the candidates in each city. And then, because the popes were metropolitan bishops for all the Sicilian sees, ultimately they chose between the candidates they contributed to select. So, you know, it's even better than in the university. Second, since the Pope had direct access to the emperor, they were uniquely placed to protect the estates of absentee landlords, especially against the abuses of the imperial administration. It was very real danger. Furthermore, their huge Sicilian landholdings enabled them to offer offices in their administration and stewardships of their lands to the local elite. Finally, they played an increasing role in the collection of taxes, interposing themselves between the state and the Sicilian nation. Combining these strategies, they became the leading protectors of Sicilian society. But since from 569, the governor was elected by the local elite, the Pope, who was the leader of this local elite, actually chose the governor. And since the governor chose the civic officers, he actually controlled the civic officers also. So you see the system functions. Obviously, such a level of power ultimately led the Pope to clash with the emperors, who dismantled the pontifical system of power in Sicily in 4 stages. First, with the advent of the strategia around 500, the local governor was no longer elected. So, first point. Second, in the 720s, the sees of Sicily, the bishoprics, were transferred under the jurisdiction of the Patriarch of Constantinople, effectively depriving the popes of their control over episcopal election. This, and not iconoclasm, in my mind, was the real reason behind the conflict in the 720s, when the popes blocked the fiscal process in Italy. Third, and in retaliation, in the 730s, Leo III enacted a fiscal reform whose monetary dimension we have seen previously. That's when he created the new coin. But this reform deprived the popes of any role in the fiscal process. Fourth and last, after an ill-advised decision of Pope Zachariah to support the usurper Artavasdos against Emperor Constantine V, this emperor seized the pontifical estates in Sicily, ending the papal power over the island. And consequently, around the middle of the 8th century, the popes had lost all powers in the island. So to conclude, behind the apparent chaotic evolution of the institutional and economic history of the island, three main features can be identified. First, the ever-growing importance in Sicily of the eunuchs of the imperial cubiculum, the personal servants of the emperors. Second, the steady implementation of politics aiming at ensuring that the local elite enjoyed privileged access to the sovereign. Third, the constant desire of the imperial government to harness Sicily's resources to its profit by anchoring the island economy to the east through various monetary policies. Ultimately, it is the synergy between these 3 points that ensured the continued loyalty of the province toward Constantinople and made of Sicily the bulwark of imperial power in the central Mediterranean. But paradoxically, the desire of the emperor to assert total control over Sicily led the popes, their erstwhile subjects, to throw their lot with the Carolingians, ultimately resulting in the rise of a rival empire in the West. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I had the chance to work in a place where we hosted 2 numismatic societies. So I had an idea of what we can do with coins, but that was a proper demonstration. So thank you very much. We have time for questions. Questions can be in English, in Italian, or in French. Or maybe online. It's possible to ask questions on the Q&A. Yes. Question in the room?
In italiano innanzitutto, grazie, molte grazie, io ho imparato moltissimo, quindi la mia, diciamo, non è una domanda tecnica, ma una domanda così, proprio, diciamo, che nasce un po' dall'ignoranza. Vorrei chiedere, diciamo, questo curriculum imperiale ha avuto quindi un ruolo di continuità praticamente nella strategia, diciamo, costantinopolitana rispetto al controllo, questa strategia di controllo della Sicilia. E nelle varie fasi invece, diciamo, per esempio dall'iconoclasma all'iconodulia all'iconoclasma di nuovo, questo curriculum ha sempre rappresentato un elemento di continuità, voglio dire, a prescindere dall'atteggiamento degli imperatori, ha subito dei cambiamenti in funzione proprio diciamo, dell'atteggiamento dell'imperatore, ecco. Cioè si può parlare di una continuità costantinopolitana che prescinde, diciamo, poi dalle vicissitudini di Costantinopoli legate all'iconoclasmo nel caso specifico.
Sì, rimane sempre lo stesso, perché ogni volta che un nuovo imperatore arriva al potere, lui viene con i suoi eunuchi. Per esempio, quando Leone III ottiene il potere, il primo stratega che lui spedisce in Sicilia è un tale Paolo, che era già un eunuco al suo servizio come privato, che entra nel cubiculum, che diventa stratega di Sicilia e poi diventa esarca, quello che viene ammazzato alla fine degli anni 720. Al contrario, quando Irene prende il potere, dunque Iconodula, lei spedisce in Sicilia il Patrizio Niceta, che diventò un confessore, che era addirittura pittore, dunque non si poteva fare più iconoduro. Dunque rimane sempre, hanno sempre degli eunuchi fedeli, e non penso che era così tanto importante per la gente, per una buona parte della gente, l'iconoclasma. Dunque.
Ok, grazie.
Spero. Più chiaro di così.
Io avevo una domanda. Quando si cambia la moneta e quindi si deve pagare una moneta e un terzo, invece di una moneta. Quindi è l'interesse di ognuno di riportare le monete vecchie per avere le nuove più leggere.
Sì, 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 hai ragione. Aspetta, se riesco a ritornare indietro. Mm. No, vediamo se si trova sulla figura. Allora, sì, questo vedi? Questa è la produzione, la produzione più alta che si vede su tutto lo schema. Allora, perché lui conia così tante monete? Non è che a un certo punto vuole fare festa ogni sera, è soltanto che per attuare la riforma bisogna riconiare le vecchie monete già in circolazione. Dunque lì c'è un aumento della connessione che non rispecchia delle spese pubbliche immane o imprese militari, eccetera, è legato a questo. Nello stesso modo, nell'undicesimo secolo c'è un imperatore Romano III che era una frana, falliva tutto quello che faceva, ma ha coniato in tipo 6 anni più monete di tutti gli imperatori tra 720 e 920. Una coniazione immane ed è il momento in cui cambiano pure la lega. Dunque, di nuovo, questo ha senso soltanto se si può riconiare e cambiare tutta la moneta. Dunque, non sempre quando vediamo un aumento delle coniazioni, questo rispecchia un aumento della spesa pubblica o anche un aumento delle risorse finanziarie dello Stato. Se come se io facessi la spiccioli ho più monete della mia tasca, ma complessivamente il valore è lo stesso.
Avrei una piccola curiosità. Quel nome di funzionario non attestato altrimenti è emboliator?
Embolator.
Embolator. Quanti ne conosciamo che si chiamano embolatores? Che si definiscono
avete la totalità del corpus su questa slide. Perché ricostruire l'amministrazione per questo periodo, ma a livello dell'impero, è un po' come il lavoro di questo tizio in Creta che aveva 2 o 3 pezzi di affreschi e ha ricostruito le intere scene. Questa è l'intera parte del corpus e sono tutti dello stesso tizio. Ma tutte le matrici sono diverse. Dunque, o è rimasto in ufficio per molto tempo, ma lì ci vorrebbe uno che rimane per 50 anni, o allora c'era gente a Costantinopoli in Sicilia che avevano il diritto di coniare con il suo sigillo, un po' come i nostri ministri hanno delle macchine per firmare, diciamo. E dunque sì, forse è stato dunque che fosse stato un ufficio che non era durato molto tempo, ma adesso abbiamo comunque l'altro menziona la Sicilia, dunque è rimasto più a lungo, ma è la stessa cosa per aspetta. Questo per esempio, lui il protonotario dell'inizio dell'VIII secolo, non è che è arrivato, è sparito e per un secolo non esisteva più la funzione, sicuramente ce n'erano altri tra la serie del IX secolo, è soltanto che abbiamo quello che abbiamo conservato. Anche, voglio dire, il sigillo di Mezzesios, imperatore, ovviamente ha coniato, non mi ricordo dov'è, ma ha usato il suo sigillo per decine, migliaia di volte, abbiamo trovato uno. Dunque, sì, la perdita è enorme. In Sicilia, per certi strateghi, sappiamo per esempio un tizio era in posto, che ne so, 8 anni, abbiamo 10 sigilli, 7 matrici diverse. Dunque, statisticamente c'erano decine di matrici, potenzialmente. Ovviamente lui non è che distruggeva la sua matrice ogni volta col martello e colpiva accanto e distruggeva la matrice, vuol dire che diverse persone ne avevano. Ma questo significa pure che il tasso di conservazione di quello che abbiamo è ridicolo. È la stessa cosa per le monete. Questo, il Die Studies di Fugge è basato su 4.700 monete per 3 secoli, sapendo che ogni anno ne coniavano, diciamo, 500.000. Come vedete il tasso di conservazione è molto basso. Ma anche il commercio di Sicilia, per esempio, c'è soltanto un sigillo, mentre era una cosa attaccata su ogni bene che si commerciava, e soltanto uno o 3 sono stati conservati.
Thank you so much. I have a question in English, if that's okay.
That's okay.
I wonder if you could say something about the iconography of some of these coins, which in particular on this slide,
This one?
some of the, yes. So the symbols that are, or objects that are represented and the significance.
Okay, so which one is of interest?
Um,
This one, I think, is the one you prefer.
yeah, I don't know if it's a processional cross or
Oh,
something.
you mean this?
Yes.
Okay. So first of all, look at these ones. So do you hear me?
Yeah.
So this is the emblem, okay? And this is the cross. It's very bad. The main problem is that is also a mark of value. This kind of cross, this is a trellis. Okay? Well, this one is a solidus. You see, because there are steps.
I see.
So it's both a mark of value and a symbol. So what happened when the emperor decided that he will leave the orders to Christ, which happened there? He don't want to disappear. So it goes on the rivers. But the main problem is that if it goes on the rivers, there is no mark of value. So it's holding the mark of value. That's why you have this ridiculous little cross.
Yeah.
You know? It holds the cross with steps. Why is it holding the cross with steps? Because they say, this is a solidus. But you have also trellis in this case with all this cross. Okay? And the main issue is the appearance of Christ. And just to name the second, but the first appearance of Christ is actually in Spain, in the coinage, something more like one area. So this coinage more or less appears at the time of the Queen's Expansion, when they decided that henceforth Christ should be represented as a man, no more as a lamb. Right? So in the same synod, there are also settled matters about Easter. And on Easter, the imperial costume is the lowest. So that's why you see here. So maybe there is a connection. And the main issue is why this specific representation of Christ, because you know, just on the second reign, and on the second reign, he put Christ once more, but it's another kind of Christ. So the main issue is why this kind of Christ, and on the second reign, another one. Now, it's in history, it hasn't been explained. My own explanation, if you want.
I'd be delighted.
Is that you see in the Gospel of Bulwark, which is a manuscript, there are two ways of depicting Christ. One is this one, so-called Syriac portrait. The other one is the classic pantograph. And Vivien told that they tend to use the pantograph after the metamorphosis, when Christ has revealed himself as God. While on the episode before the metamorphosis is represented as a man. So maybe this was the simplest and safest solution. Okay, I put Christ on a coin, but it is Christ as a human. Let's say that it was before. So in this way, maybe you avoid the problem of representing Christ. Because all the discussion around iconoclasm, it already went on before. It's not in 1730s when wake up and say, oh, why should we put the Bible? So this would be my take, the difference. But Okay, I don't know what I tell you. So it's a typical point, but actually it never existed. And the actual signal, the symbol, so it's the Clavis.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Thank you.
No, I'm thinking down. It's the last opportunity.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you again, Vivien, for this incredible paper and your detailed answers. So now we know how to understand the coin for those of us who didn't have any idea before. Thank you very much again. The next talk will be Manuela Gianandrea will speak about Rome, and you can come here or attend online. Thank you very much and see you next month.